A land before the storm. At the dawn of the 19th century, Venezuela was a quiet but deeply divided colony on the northern edge of South America. Its society was shaped by plantations, slavery, and a rigid hierarchy inherited from Spanish rule. Vast plains stretched inland, while small port cities connected the colony to the empire across the Atlantic. Beneath the surface calm, however, pressures were building. Social inequality, economic frustration, and the distant echo of revolutions in Europe and North America. This is where Venezuela's modern story begins. 1. Independence and disillusion. 1800 to 1830. Breaking away from Spain, the early 1800s were a time of global upheaval. Spain, weakened by war in Europe, struggled to control its colonies. In Caracas, local elites, mostly Creoles born in the Americas, began to imagine self-rule. In 1810, local leaders removed the Spanish governor, claiming to govern in the name of the deposed Spanish king. A year later, Venezuela formally declared independence. It was a bold act, but one that immediately plunged the country a brutal war. The War of Independence was not a clean struggle between colonizers and patriots. It was violent, fragmented, and often civil in nature. Neighbors fought neighbors. Entire regions shifted loyalties. Cities fell and were retaken repeatedly. At the center of the struggle stood Simón Bolívar, a passionate and determined revolutionary. He envisioned not just Venezuelan independence, but a united northern South America. Yet his campaigns were marked by setbacks as often as victories. By 1821, after more than a decade of war, Spanish power was finally broken at the Battle of Carabobo. Venezuela was free, but exhausted. A short-lived union. Instead of standing alone, Venezuela became part of a larger political experiment. Gran Colombia, a vast republic stretching from modern Colombia to Ecuador. It was an ambitious project, but one plagued by regional rivalries, poor communication, and conflicting visions of government. Within a decade, the union collapsed. In 1830, Venezuela separated and became an independent republic. Politically free, but institutionally fragile. 2. The Age of Strongmen, 1830 to 1900. A nation without stability. Independence did not bring peace. Venezuela entered a long period dominated by caudillos, regional military strongmen who ruled through personal loyalty and force. Presidents came and went, often by coup rather than election. Constitutions were written, ignored, rewritten, and ignored again. The state was weak, and loyalty flowed toward individuals rather than institutions. Civil war and the federal question. The most destructive conflict of the century was the Federal War, 1859 to 1863. It erupted over demands for regional autonomy, land reform, and political inclusion. The war devastated the countryside. Tens of thousands died. Villages were destroyed, and the economy collapsed further. When peace finally came, it resolved little beyond ending the fighting. The end of the century. By the late 1800s, Venezuela remained poor, rural, and unstable. Coffee exports sustained the economy, but wealth was concentrated in few hands. Roads were scarce, education was limited, political life remained violent. The stage was set for a new kind of ruler, one who promised order above all else. 3. Order through authority, 1900 to 1935. The rise of centralized power. In 1908, Juan Vicente Gómez seized power and would rule directly or indirectly for nearly 30 years. His rule marked a turning point. Gómez crushed regional warlords, centralized authority, and imposed stability through repression. Political opposition was silenced, prisons filled, exile became common. Yet under his rule, something else happened, something that would reshape the arrival of oil. In the early 20th century, massive oil reserves were discovered beneath Venezuelan soil. Foreign companies arrived quickly. Wells multiplied. Export revenues surged. Oil transformed Venezuela from an agrarian backwater into a strategic energy supplier. Roads were built. Ports expanded. The state became wealthier than ever before. But the wealth flowed unevenly, and political power remained tightly controlled. When Gómez died in 1935, Venezuela was stable, but unfree. 4. Between reform and dictatorship, 1930, opening the political space. After Gómez's death, the iron grip loosened. New political parties formed. Labor unions emerged. Students demanded reform. For the first time, Venezuela began to imagine democracy. World War II increased oil demand, further enriching the state and accelerating urbanization. A brief democratic experiment. In the mid-1940s, civilian leaders introduced ambitious reforms. Universal suffrage, expanded education, and political inclusion. But democracy proved fragile. In 1948, the military intervened again, ending the experiment. Modernization under authoritarianism. The 1950s were dominated by Marcos Pérez Jiménez, a military ruler who combined repression with grand development projects. Highways, buildings, and monuments reshaped Caracas. To many, the country looked modern. To critics, it was a facade built on fear. In 1958, mass protests and military defection forced Pérez Jiménez into exile. This time, democracy would last longer. 5. Democratic stability and oil wealth, 1958 to 1980s. The Punto Fijo system. After 1958, major political parties agreed to respect election results and share power. This pact created stability unseen in Venezuela's history. Elections became routine. Civilian rule endured. For decades, Venezuela stood out in Latin America as a functioning democracy. The oil boom. Oil revenues exploded in the 1960s and 70s. The state expanded social programs, education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Millions moved to cities. Living standards rose. In 1976, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry, asserting full control over its most valuable resource. Yet beneath the prosperity, cracks were forming, hidden vulnerabilities. The economy became almost entirely dependent on oil. Manufacturing lagged. Agriculture declined. Corruption spread quietly through the system. When oil prices fell in the 1980s, the illusion of endless prosperity collapsed. 6. Crisis and disillusion, 1980s to 1998. Economic breakdown. Debt mounted. Inflation surged. Governments imposed austerity measures. In 1989, riots erupted in Caracas and other cities, an explosion of anger known as the Caracazo. The state responded with force. Hundreds, possibly thousands, died. Public trust in traditional parties never recovered. The emergence of Hugo Chávez. In 1992, a young army officer named Hugo Chávez led a failed coup. Though imprisoned, his televised speech turned him into a symbol of rebellion against the political elite. By 1998, riding public frustration, Chávez won the presidency through elections. Venezuela stood on the edge of a radical transformation. 7. The Bolivarian Revolution, 1999 to 2013. A new political order. Chávez rewrote the constitution, expanded presidential power, and promised a revolution rooted in social justice and national sovereignty. High oil prices funded massive social programs. Poverty declined. Access to education and health care expanded. Supporters saw dignity restored. Critics saw institutions weakened. Polarization and power. Over time, power concentrated around the presidency. Independent institutions eroded. Media freedom narrowed. Politics became deeply polarized. 8. Collapse and crisis. 2013 to 2025. Maduro's inheritance. Nicolas Maduro inherited Chávez's system. Without Chávez's charisma and amid falling oil prices, economic mismanagement, sanctions, and structural weaknesses converged into collapse. Hyperinflation destroyed savings. Shortages spread. Infrastructure decayed. Humanitarian emergency. Millions left the country. Hospitals lacked supplies. Electricity and water became unreliable. Daily life turned into survival. Political repression increased as opposition movements challenged Maduro's legitimacy. International isolation. Foreign governments disputed election results and imposed sanctions. Venezuela became diplomatically isolated while maintaining alliances with a few global partners. By the mid-2020s, Venezuela was facing one of the deepest peacetime crises in modern history. 9. Venezuela at a crossroads. 2025 to present. As the present unfolds, Venezuela remains suspended between competing futures. Its population is smaller, poorer, and more dispersed than at any time in a century. Its institutions are weakened. Its economy struggles to recover. Yet its resources remain vast. Its people resilient. Its history unfinished. A long struggle for balance. Venezuela's modern history is not a straight line. It is a cycle of hope and collapse, reform and reaction, abundance and scarcity. From independence to oil wealth, from democracy to authoritarianism, the same question repeats across generations. Can power, wealth, and justice coexist? The answer still remains unresolved.